I'd like to give a special thanks to Global for their generous support of this program.
This is probably the finance lens coming into it, but the line item that's the biggest in the business, which is the people side of it, 40 people in an office space and no meeting rooms in it, people are on call 70% of the time, we're going to have a bit of an issue with acoustics. We just started pulling all of these random objects and loose furniture from other divisions and other areas. That delta of focus space is becoming the more prevalent area. Those collaboration zones are becoming a bit impractical. Head of Workspace that then came in was like, well, I don't want, my metrics say that I need to get all this space utilized. What do we actually need out of our in-office? It's really a team that had to do problem solving. That physical relationship is actually getting more and more important in this digital world. It always happens when they have a stronger connection and it's all on the whiteboards. It's amazing how making things simple in a very noisy and data-heavy world now can drive a lot of outcomes. Nothing better than seeing people come through and put a line through their big objective of the week. Being able to actually talk through problems and work through problem solving live and with a whiteboard has an immense impact on not only solving the problem, but the learning of the wider team.
The consulting firm spent 18 months and a fortune building the perfect collaborative workspace. 6 months later, the direction changed and they tore it out. That moment launched a mission to rethink the way we design workspaces. The way we work has changed. We're fighting a constant onslaught of distraction and doing more deep cognitive work. We need quiet, we need focus, and we can't find it. Welcome to What the F is Happening to the Office, the podcast where we dig into the issues that are driving how work and workplaces are evolving. Hi, I'm Bob Fox, and if you're an architect, designer, workplace strategist, or just someone trying to figure out what the office should be, we're discussing the patterns that drive innovation and change in the work environment. Every guest brings something unique that will reshape how you think about the workplace. So please subscribe. It helps more people to find us, and you won't miss an episode. Today's guest is Adam Morgan, co-founder of Bureau, a company that designs and builds soundproof booths. Adam looks at the entire ecosystem and what attracts people to the office and studies what it takes to provide workers with the environment that they need to do their best work. Adam, welcome. It's great to have you here.
Thanks for that, Bob. Appreciate it. Looking forward to chatting about all things workspace.
So I have to ask you, are you sitting in one of your booths?
Always got to be on brand. We're sitting in one of our 1 to 2 person modular booths in what is a busy and bustling co-working space on the outside of the window. So you can't see it from obviously where we are, but yes, always got to be on brand.
So why don't you give us a little bit of background and how did you start Bureau?
Yeah, it's really from kind of that problem statement that you were running through at the start there, Bob. It was not from a heavy design, architecture, construction background, but a background in the problem statement of inefficient workspaces. So working in finance across the US, the UK, and Australia had been some of these really big organizations, thousands of people in big commercial office plates, A-grade buildings, very nicely designed offices. However, just seeing the impact of how those teams were changing and growing and the inability of the fixed environment to be able to adapt to those teams as they were growing was something that started to cause a lot of problems to me directly and the teams that we were running in terms of trying to get people engaging in the office, collaborating in the right way, getting the most out of people, and then starting to see later on in my career that the sort of more the financial waste that would go on to the kind of redesign, reposition, and kind of office churn that was happening in the workspaces. I've always had a strong view and passion for well-designed spaces, not knowing the depths of the understanding of how they actually get designed in the first place, but an avid user of greatly designed spaces. And it was really coming from the problem statement side of it of, there needs to be some elements in here that can help businesses to create more flexibility in spaces with all the change that was happening around, now so AI, but at the time, a lot of video calling and conferencing coming into people's everyday work life. So yeah, Bob, to answer your question, really, really coming from the problem side of it and seeing some of the inefficiency in office fit out.
Share with us that story that I started out with 6 months of planning, 12 months of building, and then all of a sudden it changes and gets ripped out. What happened? What did you learn in that moment? What happened between the physical space and the people trying to do the work inside of it?
Yeah, it was an office site in London, down in Canary Wharf, that specific example where we had a new innovative financial advisory team was coming out, where we built up a group of data scientists building large language models before all of the AI had come along. So this was about 8 or 9 years ago. And we needed to build a space for them in what was a traditional finance firm or consulting firm that actually allowed them to do their type of work. So we needed big collaborative areas, big interactive screens that allowed them to run almost like a whiteboard, but in a larger room. We needed to get rid of any of these kind of private offices around the outside. It's really a team that had to do problem solving, run sprints as well. So much more like a technology team within a traditional finance and accounting business. And it was a brand new initiative for the firm that I was working at the time. And they had invested very heavily in the people side of it. So myself, my now business partner as well, were leading the team. And we went out and hired a lot of the profiles that I was just describing before, but they hadn't thought through the workplace side of it. So they just kind of dumped us in a floor in just like a normal standard kind of finance pen. So very uninspiring wall partitions between a couple of desks. And we were in and amongst all these other different neighborhoods and teams as well. So disrupting them all the time with the way that we were working, we just started pulling all of these random objects and loose furniture from other divisions and other areas to pull it all together, started kind of spacing out our own space. So that was starting to become inefficient. So the heads of the business wanted to invest more in the team and the outputs that we were trying to get to, as well as also build a space for us to be able to present all of these findings to the private equity clients that we were building the advice for. So it's kind of like large language models for rent before the AI side of it, but in private equity transactions that had high volume, so like retail stores and everything. So they engaged a top-tier architecture firm to design and spec out this beautiful new innovative space. It was going to take up a whole one of the floor plates on the 15 or so floors that they had down in Canary Wharf in one of the multiple buildings that they had. Spent 6 months designing it out, going through that iterative process. Again, these consulting firms and all big enterprise businesses, so many cooks in the kitchen. So that process took a long, protracted time. Then setting up the actual construction of it, that took another kind of 9 months or so to actually get it built out. And then so by the time that we'd built the initial team, started getting our initial customers in, we were sort of a year and a half, 2 years from the actual space being ready to move into. And by the time we'd moved into that space, like a lot of these financial firms, it's a partnership model. So they'd been feuding and fighting over the team and where the ownership was going and everything. And so they ended up dissolving the team and just bringing in as a standard offering into various different practices of the business. So this need for a confined, innovative space for this team was then deemed null and void because they'd disbanded our team basically. And so they had half a floor plate, and the head of Workspace that then came in was like, well, I don't want, my metrics say that I need to get all this space utilized. There's this big sort of new innovation center that you've built that's not getting used. And within sort of 2 to 3 months had it ripped out and just put standard desks and chairs back into the space, which it ended up being a beautiful space, but just it shows you that cycle of time, energy, and money that went into an area that ended up being a bit of a waste.
But it sounds like that was more of a cultural or an organizational alignment issue, as opposed to a problem with the space.
Yes. Yeah. It was definitely the organizational alignment piece of it. Yes, 100%. But then that really drove into me, well, how are they actually making decisions about all the other floors that are getting fitted out in the space? How are they actually looking to adapt and change them? And if they had more flexibility in the space, would they not have had to go on this huge initiative to try and build some new flexible collaborative space anyway? Maybe we need to be building more modular and flexible components into the way that we're building the fixed environment currently.
You come from a finance background, and I'm wondering, how does that experience shape your perspective? And how do you think about what a workplace needs to do?
I think it really comes back down to, yes, it was finance, but I think the piece of it was more so just like big corporates. So, how do you get a team to come in and be galvanized and be as energetic as possible? How do you create a place that's built with human centric design around it for practicality? Obviously, you want it to look and feel like a great space, but how are you making sure that you're actually getting the most out of, and this is probably the finance lens coming into it, but the line item that's the biggest in the business, which is the people side of it, and the one that actually drives all the top line and drives all the innovation within the business, how do you make sure you're creating a space that is not only exciting them, but allowing them to get their best work done? So it was more so around how are people building those spaces and tools within the space as well to make sure that the employees can actually, as I said before, do their best work. And so I think the kind of financial side of it's probably more so just around making sure you're maximizing the ROI on your headcount as opposed to having a space that looks really great but could potentially end up not being as practical.
Well, I think given that experience and given your background, what are the measures that you look at to determine if a space is performing? And how do you know if the space is achieving what it set out to accomplish?
Yeah, so I think a lot of that there's probably been a lack of data and analysis on it's getting much better now, but in the workplace traditionally. So things like managing occupancy now has become a huge piece off the back of COVID and people trying to figure out how much of their portfolio they actually need to be using. So I think the measuring of success of a space, I think, can come out in a few different ways. So some of those harder metrics around occupancy, around utilization, around usage that you can track through sensors and thermal pieces as well, which we've started pulling into a lot of the products that we're innovating and using now. But then also, I think one of the big pieces is kind of like your ENPS, like your qualitative staff surveys of how they're engaging and actually fitting into the space. So I think bringing a model of testing and trying different initiatives to continue to drive that workplace success or workplace happiness metrics is what's going to drive the outputs from your team. So being able to try things out like, how do you bring it, what happens if you bring more biophilic elements and designs into a workspace? What net impact does that have on people? Does it actually make people feel calmer? Does it make people feel more relaxed in the workspace? It's hard to track some of those things on a specific performance metric, but you can pull it out of the employees through engagement and some of that qualitative feedback.
I think the office now has become a piece of a much larger ecosystem. We're working at home. We have co-working, flex space, cafes that people work in. How do you think about that ecosystem today? And where does the office still provide value?
Yeah, that's a super interesting one as well. I think you look at some of the overall stats. So with remote capable businesses, I think about 50% of employees are running some sort of hybrid model. 25% of them also are fully remote. And then there's, another sort of 20 or so that are fully on site, like percentage of this larger US cohort. So a huge amount of hybrid workers interacting with spaces differently. Where I see that office as a larger piece of the ecosystem really starting to take traction is in just the ways that real estate owners are starting to shape their portfolios and assets. I think that's starting to have a big rise in commercial real estate. So I think first of all, the office is still a very valued place, and a lot of the businesses that are doing really well or starting to see really great impact and innovation are ones that have really great team culture. And not to say that office is the only piece that builds team culture, but it is one of the big pieces that brings communities together. It's almost like going back to our primal nature of how you work together in communities. Everybody comes together. There's a big part of both the social side of things, but also purpose, drive, and energy that they're going to get out of a business and their role. And they get that from being around other people that are part of that mission, that are part of that business and organism growing forward. So I think the office still plays a huge piece in how that culture and fabric of any company can come together. And you really see the companies that thrive and excel are the ones that have a great culture at their core. That's how they retain really good people. Outside of financial metrics, the people enjoying what they're doing every day is the biggest driver that keeps them in the seat. We spend so much of our time at work that we're trading off from spending with our family or with our friends or doing our hobbies. And so you want to be able to be enjoying who you're working with, how you're working with them, getting purpose and drive out of it. I would argue that it's very, very hard to do that in a fully remote environment. Not to say that how that impacts your overall happiness. However, I just don't think you're ever going to get that cultural purpose and significance out of a role if you're not actually physically interacting with the wider business and the wider company. So I think the first piece of that is that I think office still plays a huge role in building cultures, building great businesses. But I also think that what's happening now is shifting the way that offices are being built. So there's a huge rise in this, not just co-working, but these sort of flex operators, whereby you've smaller parceled up office suites instead of full commercial floors. This is creating more smaller dynamic spaces for these employees to work out of. And, that co-working flex inventory is growing sort of 20% year on year. It's becoming a larger and larger chunk of the overall. It's still currently a small on aggregate portion of commercial real estate, but it is growing rapidly. And I think that's exciting people and getting them to want to engage more in office spaces. They get a wider community. There's other businesses in the building. They're managed offices, so they usually have good amenities as well. I think that's a big driver of, yes, the office is still a core piece of how businesses are going to grow in the future. However, real estate asset owners and real estate advisors are starting to figure out that they need to package it up slightly differently than it was in the traditional sense to get the same adoption into these new ways of working.
I think I would agree with you. And I think that everybody probably enjoys being in the office and meeting with their teammates on some level. I think the challenge is how much time do you spend doing that? Is it 2 days a week, or is it 5 days a week, or is it maybe just a few days a month? But there's been, I think, a lot of debate about the return to office mandates. And I'm curious what you're seeing on the ground when companies pull those levers. What happens to the people that show up, and if the office isn't ready for them, or what are some of the challenges that you see when people are forced back into the work environment?
Yeah, I think it's interesting, right? I think in the Fortune 100 companies, I think 2023 was about 5% or so was doing a 5-day in office. Obviously, this was straight off the back of COVID. It's probably as flexible as it's ever been. And then I saw a stat recently. I think now we're back up around 55% or something. So, will it get back to the full 100%? Everyone's in the office all the time. There'll always be businesses that don't do that. I think it'll normalize out. Will potentially grow a little bit further, but there's a huge portion where I think this flex model is going to be the kind of thing that sustains. And whether that's 4 days in, 1 day remote, that balances like that seem to be what's keeping workforces happy. In terms of the businesses pushing these mandates and what they're going to get out of their business in these mandates, I think it's challenging to go from fully remote to fully in and not expect that that's going to impact the way that people have structured their lives around, their family, their kids. They could be looking after a sick parent, or there could be a myriad of different things or commitments that they've adjusted their life to based on what their mandate is. Primarily, the only ones that I'm saying of these that are really just are the ones that eliminate the commute at the end of each day, that allow you to go and do these services. Not saying that you should be running off all day every day when you're supposed to be working, going and doing these other bits and pieces. But I think that flexible model is a great stepping stone into figuring out as an organization, do we need them in 5 days a week, or does 4 get us there and give employees enough flexibility that they can pick a flex day of the week, or if it is on Fridays or whatever, it allows them to make sure that they're picking up their parent from an aged care home on a Friday, or going to see them in the morning in their commute time that they would usually have, that allows them to get some of those family value pieces in, or scheduling children or whatever that may be. So I think in terms of the return to office piece of it, I think where it normalizes on the flex side of it will be interesting. If it is, a day, 2 days, also what impact does, if we all listen to Elon and assume that work's going to be optional in the next 10 years, like that obviously has a huge impact as to what happens to commercial office spaces, but without going right down the polar end of that. But what does happen if people's required hours for their specific roles reduces due to AI and tools. Like, not that it fully eliminates anything, but maybe it allows either it goes one way of everyone's outputs need to be 50% more, in which case they need to be in the office more to get that output done, or do the roles reduce the output that they require, which usually never really happens. If they can, if businesses can get more out of the base that they have, they're going to do that as opposed to restrict it. And so what does that have to impact? Does that have to the flex operation? So I think, to answer your question, Bob, the flex model seems to be what's building resilience and seems to be working for both the wider employee base and employers. And I think the switch to get people more so into the office, where at least I'm seeing it be successful across a lot of small to medium enterprise startups that we work with, all the way through to some of the enterprise businesses, is using that flex model to also figure out as an enterprise, what do we actually need out of our in-office? Like what data have we got, and what can we start looking at in the numbers that shows an impact on productivity?
You talked about the utilization rate, and I think pre-pandemic, if you hit 50%, maybe 60% on a good day, you were doing well. And now I think it's made people much more aware that people aren't in the office as much as what was expected. But I think what's happening is that there's a shift in the types of space that we need, and that the focus spaces now are running at a much higher utilization rate than the open collaborative areas, or at least that's grown in demand from what it was before. So I'm curious how you look at that, and the way that we've been designing offices. What have we been getting wrong?
I think that to me is the really that excites me the most, that piece of it, because I think it allows you to it shows you these levers that can be pulled that actually impact a business. If you can start realizing that, to your stat points before, Bob, 56, 57% of utilization for focused rooms, dedicated private spaces versus, like 25 to 30% for those open collaboration areas based on occupancy, from about, I think it was about 35,000 workspaces where they did a test across 9 different countries. So that delta of focus spaces becoming the more prevalent area creates a bit of an exciting opportunity to then also look at, how much space do we actually require for these teams in the offices that we're in? How does that marry up to the leases that we have now, with a shift going from really big long-term leases that are starting to trend on the smaller side, so going from 10 plus to 5-6 year option leases that are becoming more prevalent. How do we reduce the size of the office space that we have based on our new flex policy of, like, when do we actually have everyone in the office? When does it ever actually get to full capacity? And what days, and when it does get to full capacity, now based on those internal stats that you're talking about, Bob, of how the office is designed, how do we actually make use of the space that we have to make sure that we're maximizing all of that? And that's where it gets really exciting. So there's some stats that have come out for 2026 that have said that roughly 25% of desks sit empty all day. So just that being said, it's like, okay, great. Well, that could be a quarter of a large portion of your office space that's been dedicated to fixed desks that can then be used, as you said before, for some of these high utilization spaces of focused areas, collaboration, meeting spaces, but where people can get their individual work done. If you can reduce some of that out of the wider office print and then get overall a smaller office print for the next lease that's coming up, but also overlaying the current occupancy data that you have from your staff, and then look at how the office is being designed with some actual data behind it. Of usually it says we need 0.8 of a desk per employee, but on this data, it's telling you that it's much lower than that. And so being able to start designing spaces that allow for those peak occupancy times through modularity and through flexible products is, I think, something that becomes really exciting. And we're starting to see a lot of businesses try that out, because having and using things that are modular, from demountable walls through to, I've seen a bunch of desking systems that are all pioneered from Google, that are all on kind of coasters and wheel pieces, and they all roll out and fold out as well, through to meeting pods and phone booths and other bits and pieces. It allows you to make sure that you're optimizing that space and bringing like a fluid design element into how the workforce is being interacted with. So I guess to answer your question, Bob, I find it really exciting, and it almost is something that organizations can start weaponizing to get the most out of their fixed office lease.
A lot of the conversation about getting people back into the office has been about collaboration, serendipitous interaction, the social interaction, the things that I think the open office was really designed to try to accommodate. But I think now you're seeing that there's a lot more demand for those private, quiet, non-distractive types of work environments. So how do those things mix together? Because in some ways they probably conflict. And how do you think about how the office gets put together, to encourage people to come back, but still provide the tools that they need?
Yeah, I think that piece is really interesting. Even I take an example from our office today. We've got a large amount of go-to-market sales team members in our New York office, and so they're on calls a lot of the time. They're doing their kind of follow-ups. All of the phone booths and meeting areas and focus spaces on our floor are full all the time. However, I think the the collaboration and that open plan piece of it that conflicts with that is I think it's just happening at different time points now. So it's not necessarily that we're all sitting in this open floor plan area and we're just chatting over the partition and discussing ideas or getting up and having a bit of a whiteboarding session. I do think there's a lot of people that are now doing more of their busy work, their admin pieces when they're at the desk. And then a really large portion of their time is on video calls like this. Like you're never really having in-person meetings larger than sort of 2 to 3 people. I think the average is kind of 1.7 people in a meeting space. So it's outside of bigger kind of offsites and town halls and everything. A lot of it is remote. Like you might have more people than the 1.7, but physically in the room, that's the kind of average. And so if you're needing to find quiet space to do that, those collaboration zones are becoming a bit impractical. And so where I think a lot of the collaboration and interaction is actually happening is people are coming in using the office to get a lot of focus work done. But because they're then in that community of the team, they're then going to grab coffee with their colleague to talk through a problem. They're going to grab lunch with their manager to do their review instead of doing it over a Zoom. They're all going to a gym class after work because they're all in the same pod and they go to one underneath the building and then they all go home after. So I think the collaboration is happening at different points of time and not in the traditional open plan purpose of how they'd set the offices up for. So I think a lot of that open plan is now becoming more focus space or being used as more focus space. And the collaboration is still something that happens by having everyone in the workplace, but they're happening at times that are more so centered around the social interaction between people within the workday, as opposed to just having that as a sort of constant flow throughout the day.
So it sounds like the face-to-face time is still very important to an organization, and that's probably not desirable to do it over a Zoom call or a team call or something like that, but that you want to be able to get your work done, not have the distractions, but still meet face-to-face with your coworkers.
Yes, yeah, exactly. I think that's definitely how we're seeing it play out. I think it's something where building accountability within the team, building accountability for individuals to get great work done. It always happens when they have a stronger connection with the person that they're working with or the person that they're working for, because it builds up the trust signals. It gets rid of any barriers between that. It really, what we're seeing is that the impact of that physical relationship is actually getting more and more important in this digital world. So there's a couple of organizations that are remote first businesses, and a lot of these people can go the whole year and only meet their colleagues for the first time at their kind of, their sales kickoff or their annual offsite or whatever that may be, which again may work for some organizations. However, I think for the broad mass of corporates and businesses, whether they're small to medium enterprise or larger enterprise businesses, that nothing really beats the pace of the in-person problem solving or collaboration.
You mentioned, I guess your team does whiteboarding. And so I'm curious, how does the whiteboarding work in your firm? And that's clearly a face-to-face, person-to-person, low tech kind of thing.
Yeah. We've got a pretty global organization. So 2 Canadian offices on either coast, Dallas, New York office in the US, Australia, UK. So a lot of dispersed offices. And in each office, we do a office weekly kickoff and it's all on the whiteboard. So it's, teams running through their kind of business and personal best from the week before. And then everyone gets depending on what team you're in, it gets skewed to a certain area. But everyone basically puts up like, what's their big objective for the week? Gets written up on the whiteboard, and there's an amazing power in, this is a specific example of it, an amazing power in visualization, collaborating, and actually putting ideas down in writing, and getting people to also go up and write theirs down onto the whiteboard as well. Again, that like accountability, that interactive piece of it, it's then there staring at them every day. It's not necessarily like a dashboard or a new data piece. They've got enough of that stuff happening in their day to day and how they get managed. But it's amazing how making things simple in a very noisy and data heavy world now can drive a lot of outcomes as well. So that's, just a personal story from our side of it. We've got whiteboards in every office, use it for everything. But also what I've seen a lot of customers do and a lot of businesses that we work with is those collaborative moments where people can actually, depending on how you learn, whether you're a visual or auditory learner, being able to actually talk through problems and work through problem solving live and with a whiteboard has an immense impact on not only solving the problem, but the learning of the wider team around you, we've found. So some of these business owners have been talking about the ability for people to ramp up their knowledge curve of either what the business does or what their function does or how their leader goes about problem solving through using tools like this, because they're interactive. You're there, you're live, you can ask questions, and you can go up and put your sort of input into it as well, which again, everyone being in the same room allows a lot of quick problem solving. You don't have 7 people or 8 people on a Zoom call all muted talking over the top of each other and like running through bits and pieces. So I do think that a lot of those tools are very, very great to manage dispersed workforces, which a lot of businesses are now with the video calling and doing things digitally. From a problem solving and visualizing ability, the traditional old whiteboard still rings through, not only in our offices, but I see them in a lot of our clients and customer spaces. Also, a lot of the co-working spaces. There is some amazing data on the utilization of bookable meeting rooms across a co-working site. So let's take like a WeWork, for example. The rooms that have a whiteboard in them and the utilization blip on the whiteboard functional rooms versus ones that don't have a whiteboard is pretty large.
So where is your whiteboard? Is it in a special room or a conference room, or is it out in the hall? Is there a space dedicated for the whiteboard?
Yeah, so it's in our actual office suite. So we've got like a 15-person office suite in a flex space in New York. So that specific one is just in the open office, so everybody can see it at all times. In a lot of the other spaces, yeah, there's a whiteboard that's just wheeled into the main area and space that people are in. So it's the idea is, I think, having it visual in front of the whole team. So it's kind of looking at you every day as you come in, which is great. So there's nothing better than seeing people come through and put a line through their big objective of the week. It's a great galvanizer and gets everybody pretty motivated.
Walk me through the picture of what makes a space truly conducive to focused work. Is it acoustics, lighting, air quality? You mentioned biophilia earlier. How do all those pieces come together to create a great work environment?
Yeah, I think exactly kind of answered the question in your question, but I do think it's taking each of those pieces and trying to understand how that is going to impact the workspace. So I think acoustics, there's a couple of pieces that are maybe a little bit more data driven around, okay, if we've got 40 people in an office space and no meeting rooms in it, people are on call 70% of the time, we're going to have a bit of an issue with acoustics because it's going to be people yelling at each other all the time. Or, don't go sit the developer team in with the middle of the sales team without their own walled off area or without sort of areas for them to go into for focus space. So I think in terms of being able to create the most effective and optimized space, it really looks at figuring out and understanding what your team's trying to get out of it as well. Are you a heavy sales driven organization where you've got the whole team that's in there and they're basically just on calls all day? Are you a early stage startup that has a huge room of developers that are going to be in there all day, every day, grinding away, building product, but not on as many calls? And then they have their kind of scrum meeting every couple of days or week to get projects going. Because it's all well and good to just say, yep, great, awesome. Each of those things in equal parts, let's make sure we've got that in our office space. I think workplace designers are really, really great at doing this. And as part of their process, it's really getting a deep understanding of how that organization works and then figuring out, okay, great, cool. We need to value acoustics and the biophilia design into elements because our product or our service offering is about design and is about outdoors and is about, it could be a wellness product or whatever that may be. And so we want to make sure that that's reflecting into how our staff and team are engaging when they're doing their best work. So that's reflecting in the output and the great end products. But I think that with an understanding of that, you can start pulling those levers of great, cool. Here's our base standard of comfort that we want in our office, airflow, acoustics, natural light, and then figuring out how to level up from there. Do we need more biophilia? Do we need to bring in circadian lighting into the workspace? Do we need to bring in a meditation space or a sensory area for our teams to be able to calm after a busy day or to help them recharge going further on?
You've watched a lot of AI companies that are gobbling up space, and you're seeing these teams that are growing very rapidly, and they need the speed in order to grow with the AI. And I'm curious what you're seeing from that. And what does that tell us about the demand for that space, where it's headed, and how those companies are using that space?
Yeah, it's kind of these like gold rush cycles that happen across different organizations. Hopefully there's no bust on the back end of the AI gold rush, but as there's, with the volumes of thousands of companies coming through, there's usually a handful of winners and then a bunch kind of middle level. What we're seeing is a lot of these companies are going from an idea working out of maybe a co-working space with 2 people to getting funded, needing to hire 50 people tomorrow or 100 people tomorrow to get into a workspace. So what's happening there is, I think a lot of these companies are either putting to the side what the space actually needs to look like, which creates a bunch of opportunities to the way that real estate's getting built now, not only how they're actually going to interact with the space, but I think it fits into this trend that is happening a lot with the reshaping of commercial real estate, where these spec suites and pre-fitted offices, whether they're 100% pre-fitted or 80% pre-fitted, are providing great rapid solutions for these businesses to come in, get a team situated out, not have to um, take that longer design process because there's been a designer engaged with the building manager already to build out the kind of core base of it, and allow them to get into a space rapidly with their fast growing team, start figuring out what's working for them, how their team's working with flexibility in those office suites using, again, a range of modular products as well. But what we're seeing is that a lot of that spec'd space or pre-fitted out space is getting gobbled up by a lot of these newer fast growing businesses. So recently funded businesses, their timeframes are always super compressed. And then that's kind of forcing them into a lot of this pre-fitted space, which I think is starting to become a higher priority on the radar of a lot of these big real estate owners, from your Cushmans through to Hines and a bunch of others in the US. This move to well-intentioned spec suite fit outs is starting to service a lot of these customer types. The impact that may have, again, because of pace, it can make it a little bit challenging, Bob, to make the right decisions when you're going really quickly. So sometimes some of the workplace design stuff may get left by the wayside a little bit. However, I do think that it's pushing a couple of these trends around how asset owners are looking at shaping either repurposing their existing assets or shaping any new pieces that are getting finished. I do think that them getting into a lot of these spaces quickly has become the key priority for them. So that pre-fitted model does seem to be servicing that end of the market. Then how they're actually using the spaces themselves, a lot of them are very developer heavy businesses in the initial stages. So they're more so around how do they create enough collaborative space? How do they create enough engagement with their teams that allows them to get really great focused work done? Probably building out the sales team and the go-to-market side of it comes fairly quickly, but usually they're still product forward businesses. So the way that their spaces are set up are probably more on the collaborative side of it. I wouldn't be surprised if you're seeing a lot of whiteboards in there, a lot of those kind of scrum sessions and meetings. But yeah, I think the pace of the AI boom at the moment is filling a ton of real estate spaces, specifically, on the west coast of the US and in the tech bubble areas of the UK. That's where we're seeing a lot of the market shift to.
I think we're also starting to see a lot more attention being paid to health and wellness, and that there's more calming or relaxation rooms, circadian lighting, meditative audio in offices. Is that still a nice to have, or is that something that's crossed over that serious workplaces need to address?
It's still a really big piece that can really engage your employees. There's a data point from, I think it's 2004, where they had organizations that have been implementing what they were calling wellness centric design. So pieces around like, focus spaces, calming or sensory spaces. We're seeing, roughly 30% lower absenteeism from the office space, and about a 20-point jump in the job satisfaction side of it on their ENPS scores or their internal employee surveys. So I do still think that the data side of it is showing that people want to engage with and appreciate the wellness side of an office space fit out. I think the area that is really important is figuring out what actually gets used, what actually gets valued by your employees, as opposed to just kind of build it and they will come model, which I think has happened in a lot of spaces where they end up building all these amenities that just don't get used ever. So I think it's being able to balance and really understand what your employees want and actually value in that wellness side of it. Is it building in a space within your office that allows people to have that kind of calming sensory decompression? So are you then going off building a space that has maybe some meditative qualities to it, can run sort of individual meditation sessions? Is it worth you spending the investment on that because it's going to get valued? Or would the employees prefer something built into their total rewards plan on a HR people perspective that gives them, credits to be able to go and get massages or go and get more mental health services as part of their benefits package? Like I feel like sometimes people or employees don't necessarily ask the question of their teams of what they would actually value, and then can sometimes overcook and over engineer the amenities that they build into a space that then get underutilized, as you were kind of touching on before, Bob.
Yeah, what are the other amenities that you're seeing that organizations are taking advantage of?
Yeah, I think a lot of them are things around, and I don't know if you can package this into wellness, but the things around making sure that there's after trip facilities in the spaces, making sure that there's pieces around transportation as well. So like areas for people to lock up their bikes that are secure, the shower facilities within the building so that people can go to their gym on the way in, or, they ride their bike in, and in summer they get into the office after riding their bike in and they're drenched with sweat because they've had to ride over the bridge or something. So having those, some of those facilities that help the commute get better or be easier and allow people some flexibility into that are some of the big amenities that I think people are really valuing walking to the office, and that's part of their mental well-being piece of it, but they get a little bit sweaty doing it. Sure. Or, if their gym is right next to the building, that's a big piece of their energy. That can be a large part of it. I think investing in things like circadian rhythm lighting and the biophilia pieces that you were talking about before, whether you call that as wellness or that is just the space design, that's a piece that's a bit of a no-brainer, and a lot of employees are highly valuing. I think when you then start going down the other end of the spectrum around things like putting like massage chairs and stuff into workplaces, I haven't necessarily seen that be effective or something that is actually really valued by employees. I do think that investing in a calming designed workspace, whether that's color palettes, flooring styles, the kitchen amenity area as well, they're usually the things that I think drive people's everyday satisfaction in a workspace. Like there's a office in Melbourne is in the old ASOP office. So as you can tell, like very design led business, but all of the colors within the space are like earthy tones, like greens and reds. The lighting is done amazingly well, where there's no direct lighting in the space, so it's all up lights or lighting underneath features and furniture pieces. So you're never getting direct like LED lighting in your face, and the floors are repolished, purposed concrete. So you kind of into this space. The lighting's all kind of like a not quite like a med spa, but something that may be sort of on the way there. So there's that calming kind of nature there as you walk into the office, and then the kitchen area is amenitized really well. So designed really well with the backsplash lighting and some, again, nicely colored, calming, conducive like tiling and everything as well. So using the design of so having some intent around the color palettes, the materials that you're using, can have a really big impact on that well-being side of things as well.
I think there's a lot more awareness today about neurodiversity in the workplace. And I'm curious what you're seeing in terms of how that's reshaping workplace design. And are most companies addressing that need, or is that just kind of continuing to go on?
Yeah, I think that's an interesting one because I feel like it's depending on what market you're in, it's more apparent. So, you know, the Europe and the UK versus America versus Canada versus Australia. So I think it's potentially further forward in Canada and Australia than it is in the US, but it is starting to become much more of a prevalent design feature or sort of people and workplace focus. I haven't seen many organizations do it really well, I think is probably the piece where I've landed on that. Yes, they're getting more aware of it. It needs to be impacting the fixed environment in terms of having a space for these people to be able to function with equity of everybody else in the office space. So an area for them to be able to go into, use it to desensitize and calm if they're on a certain area of the neurodiverse spectrum that helps them go throughout their day. But I think there's also a bunch of policies on the workplace side of things and the people management side of things that need to also be in place to help facilitate neurodiversity in the workplace as a more holistic solution. I I just think that it's hard for businesses building a room that neurodiverse people can go into and use that as a calming space, which I've seen people do to some success and have them actually designed well. I'm still just yet to see how effective they are at actually allowing those people that have those neurodiverse diagnoses use it and it be effective. So I'm not sure if I think the spaces, while it's great to have them, I think that there's also a bigger, broader piece that organizations need to be folding that into their policies and how their team are engaging together in the workspace. So I guess to answer your question, Bob, like, yes, it is becoming more prevalent. People are starting to think of solutions for it, are starting to test products and solutions out to make the workplace more inclusive. I haven't seen it necessarily done extremely well. I would love to see a workspace that has done it extremely well, but also getting some of the results and maybe qualitative data from these people that are engaging with the spaces and seeing what they are actually valuing and does it actually solve the problem.
We talked a little bit earlier on culture and how important that is for an organization and how it's connected to the space. How do you think about the relationship between the built environment and the culture that it's trying to support?
Yeah, I think the intersection of those is really important. I think, everything from some of the points that we touched on before around, how can you make sure that you're creating a design-led space that makes people feel valued and excited to be in that office, because that impacts how they're showing up to work every day because they feel like they're in a great organization that's got a well-designed space. It's a cool place to be that attracts talent that's like them, that they really like. They get inspired by the people that are around them. So I think there's a few pieces here of the kind of entry level bar for good culture is having some actual intent and thought behind workspace and the places that they're working in. That's the non-negotiable. You can't set and have an amazing culture and then just have a bit of a throwaway on like where they're all going to go and actually work out of for the day. Just you got 20 people, you buy them all just day passes at the co-working space down the road and, good luck guys, enjoy it. It's just not going to work. You're just not going to get the right buy-in. You're not going to get the right, you're not going to get the right outcomes of what you want from the team. So I think having, firstly, like the non-negotiable thought and energy into the built environment of your space. How much space are you getting? What's the location of it? Where is it? I think is a really important piece of it. There's this really big draw that you're seeing, from King's Cross in the UK with Google and that huge tech hub that's being built out there to, Hudson Yards in New York. These kind of hub and spoke, like node areas that are getting built out that are drawing people in. Yes, that building itself is fantastic, but the actual complex that it's in or the neighborhood that it's in is also incredible as well. So, yes, it's the built environment of our office space that has intent behind it to help us drive culture, but also there's food amenities, there's fitness amenities, there's entertainment amenities all around this neighborhood that we're in, where our company's thought about placing us to drive our work culture. So like those things that I was talking to you about before, Bob, that are becoming those, there's more collaboration that we're seeing coming out of those touch points that aren't necessarily about in the middle of working, but it's, walking to get a coffee with that person from the other function or going to have your one-on-one meeting during a squash game at a gym or something. I'm not sure, but it's having these built environment places, also having the location of those being well thought through and how that impacts the culture of the team. I think that seeing the intersection of those things is pretty exciting. Like the workplace reports that are starting to show some data around office perks and commuter costs, they're sort of the top incentives that are getting people to get more engaged about workspaces. So how are you thinking about where you're placing your office? How does that impact people's commute to work? And then, yes, office perks within the actual office itself. So like, are you providing, coffee, cold brew, other bits and pieces? But also, what are some of the perks of where the office is? Like, is it in one of those great connection hubs that can drive more collaboration? I think there's some of the things that businesses are starting to think of now, and we're starting to see it happen on bigger scales with some of these enterprise businesses that are really driving great cultures in some of these tech businesses.
Adam, let me ask you one last question. Variety, flexibility, healthcare are all increasingly important, but I think the pace of change is increasing as well. And I'm just curious, given the breadth of your perspective on the workplace, what do you think the workplace is going to look like 5 years, 10 years down the road?
Yeah, interesting. I think, as we've seen workplace change over the last couple of decades, it's not necessarily something that moves that quickly. Like, I feel like we've had the open plan office for 50 years or something. So I think it's maybe 5 to 10. I think you are very right. The technology curve is real, right? Like there is a lot of change happening in businesses. There's a lot of change happening to how businesses are engaging with their teams, engaging with their customers. So I think what we will continue to see is more of these flexible, potentially smaller on aggregate footprint spaces that people are going to be working from, whether it's one like a single floor of a managed office or a half floor plan flex suite for a business. I think we'll start seeing the rise of more and more of that as a lot of these newer age businesses are starting to try and do more with less people. So I think there'll be a bit of a continued uprising. You won't get to full maturity in 10 years, but continued rising up of these smaller parcel businesses that start taking up a lot of floor spaces. So I think that'll drive a lot of managed amenities or shared amenities across a lot of these workspaces. So I think we'll continue to see that be a driver in how a lot of these newer age businesses adapt and evolve. I think that some of the larger top end of town enterprise businesses, they've been decent at planning. I've been really impressed with seeing some of these newer complexes be built out, like the two that I referenced before in King's Cross and the Hudson Yards project. I think having the foresight of these kind of communal areas that have a whole bunch of these other amenities and facilities around them is going to start becoming more and more prevalent in these city hubs. So the continuing to show people that yes, flexible work commitments and routines are now kind of the norm in terms of how many days you're coming into the office. And then this is how we're going to get you to be really excited to come into the office spaces as opposed to it just being a throwaway like it was, 20, 30 years ago maybe. But it's more around building that community, building that culture, and just continuing to see some of the big end of town really investing in these bigger, complex node and hub type models.
Yeah, I think I would agree. I think we're going to see a lot more choice that people have and the technology that's there to support it. So,
Yes.
Adam, this has been a great conversation. Thank you. I know you're busy, and I really appreciate you taking the time to chat with us and share your insights. I think you bring a unique perspective, a global perspective on what's happening in the workplace. So, thank you.
Thank you very much, Bob. Always a pleasure.